When we look at a horoscope, we see a wealth of information, and some of it is expressed in a visually dramatic way, especially if you've got a stellium or something with like 5 planets all in one house. And it's very tempting to think that that is the major feature of the chart because it's so dramatic. It's the same as when people look at what's happening on the full moon, and especially if there's an eclipse, and people go like, wow, there's an eclipse. And it's just like, well, there are lots and lots of eclipses. You know, you get at least half a dozen eclipses every year, and they're not that special, really. And also, the feelings that you have on a full moon, it may be that you're very sensitive to the moon and you have strong feelings, and they do come and go, but it's just so quick, isn't it? They come and go every month, and all of these astrologers who say this is what will happen on the full moon and tell you how you're going to feel and everything, I never see them correlating the actual facts of the matter afterwards to see whether or not their predictions came to pass, whether we actually do feel the way we're told to feel. And in fact, whether we feel that because we're told to feel it is another question. So there's quite a lot of noise, shall we call it, in the analysis of the importance of astrological configurations. If we want to understand from a chart what is most important, what I do to start with is look at the degrees of unusualness of a particular aspect. So, for example, something might, as I said, look dramatic like a big stellium, but it may not be that unusual. The stelliums come and go with a great deal of rapidity. It doesn't really show that much, especially if they are fast-moving planets. The positions of Mercury and Venus are always so close to the Sun that to have a stellium which involves the Sun and Mercury or Venus, or perhaps both, it's just not that unusual. If you add in other fast-moving planets, it doesn't make a big difference, but when you start to add in slow-moving planets, then it does. And this is the focus that I give at the beginning of a chart reading. I look at the aspects between the very slow-moving planets. If somebody has an aspect between Neptune and Pluto and Uranus or any combination, and you can add in Chiron, you can add in Saturn a little bit, then you see how unusual that is. So let me give an example. I'll take my chart first. In my chart you can see that I've got this very impressive stellium in Taurus right on the IC, and you might think that that's really unusual. It's not. It's a little bit unusual, but not that special. That's not the major feature of my chart, to be honest. Yet when you look at, let's say, the Pluto connection with Neptune, you'll see that there's a sextile there. And you think, well, that's no big deal. Everyone who was born in the second half of the 20th century has a sextile between Neptune and Pluto, and it's still going on. We'll disregard that one. That's universal. But look again. It's to the minute. And the number of times that you have a sextile to that degree of accuracy within some 300 years, it's about 10 days or something. It's really very unusual indeed. The information shown on my chart here is a little bit ambiguous. The sextile between Neptune and Pluto occurred on the day of my birth. So what I prioritized as a soul wanting to incarnate into a certain horoscope was to have that sextile for some reason. That's the mystery of my chart. So you see, we can see from the degrees of unusualness in a horoscope what is most important. If we take another chart, and looking at the chart here, we see that the Sun is conjunct Venus on the midheaven. That sounds so important, doesn't it? And is that the most important part of the chart or not? what else do we have to look for? We look at the connection first between Uranus, Neptune and Pluto. Well, there's nothing special there. And then we actually start to notice that Uranus is exactly opposite the Sun. Well, that happens only once a year, but this is exact to the day. And we have a Venus opposition to Uranus at the same time. Now that Sun-Venus conjunction starts to look a little bit more important. And when you consider that the Sun-Uranus gives you a certain very unusual take on reality, and Venus is how to express that in a beautiful way, putting that on the midheaven, you've got the sense of the essence of the chart. And it would be wrong to downgrade the importance of that particular syndrome. Now, if we look at a third chart, in this case you have two rather usual aspects. The Sun and the Mars, they conjunct every year, of course. The Moon and Neptune, they conjunct every month. So neither of those are particularly impressive until you think, well, actually, they don't often happen at the same time. It's very unusual to have a Sun-Mars conjunction at the same time as a Moon-Neptune conjunction. And in particular, on a full moon. You see, you have Moon opposition Sun, that's the full moon. If you went out at night, you'd see the full moon in the sky. And it's something that you notice. It's really a big deal, the full moon. In the olden days, they would celebrate on the full moon because that's when they could. The light was out, wandering up and down dangerous mountain slopes. I did this in Nepal once. Every month they had a celebration on the full moon. And when you went out to enjoy it, you realized it was necessary. You needed a full moon to wander up and down the mountain tracks. So to have that full moon coincide with the Neptune position is quite unusual. And then you tie it in with the Mars position, it's very unusual. So that's the figure to look for in this chart. So you see, we're examining charts differently when we have the degree of importance, the prioritization. If you actually start your chart readings with that information, just look at what's very unusual. Any connection between the slower moving planets, Jupiter maybe, Saturn certainly, Chiron, Neptune, Uranus and Pluto, if they interact together, then that's the most unusual part of it. Especially, absolutely especially if three of them are interacting at the same time. Those events are extraordinarily unusual. Now, if the soul is trying to incarnate into an appropriate horoscope, that's its first concern, as it were. I don't think that's quite how it works, but it's worth talking in these terms. So you look at the most unusual aspects first, and then you refine it. And you kind of look at other aspects that take place within that period of the unusual aspect. And then you look eventually at the house position. You know, a stellium is a stellium, and if you put it eventually into the 12th house, well then it's a 12th house stellium. But that changes every day. You know, you'd have another one tomorrow, probably. Maybe the moon would be out, but you'd probably get you would get one of the other planets a day later. So the specific reason why you were born on that particular day, that particular month, that particular year, that particular era of time, those are the considerations that we need to consider first in a chart reading, the degrees of unusualness.